Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, historical suspense and historical fantasy author, and my awesome co-hosts are sci-fi author David M. Kelly and epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens. I know his name, I promise. Lurking for Legends is an interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or comment on anything that you hear in the show. So we're going to introduce our guest in just 1 minute, but first we're just going to talk about whatever is new with us. So Richard, is there anything going on with you this week?
There is. I'm going to be selling my books at a book market this weekend. Surprise, surprise. Last week, Dave and his lovely wife came down from their art from. You could live up by the Arctic Circle, don't you? Anyway, they came down down to our place, and we actually did a book fair in a little town called St. Jacobs, and it went okay. I wouldn't say the crowd was huge, but we had fun, and we got to hang out with other authors, which is always a fun thing to do. And this Friday, I'm going to be at a licensed event called Sip and Shop. So there's a cover charge to come into the St. Jacobs Market. It's close to where we did the book fair last week, and once you pay your ticket to get in, it's licensed, so you can actually buy alcohol there, and then you can walk around with your wine or your whatever you're drinking, your beer, and you can actually shop for Christmas presents. It's kind of a fun thing. They've got fires burning, and they got carolers out there, and it's just a great time. I'm going to be in this big 60 by 100 foot tent. Hopefully, it's going to be a bit warmer than it was 2 weeks ago when we were out there, because we pretty well froze to death. Even though it's supposed to be a heated tent, is certainly not warm when you're in a tent. So I'll be there Friday night from 4 till 9, and then I'll be there again Saturday morning. This one is not licensed; it's just a regular market day. I'll be there from 7 till 3:30. So, and then on Sunday I will be at Binghamton's at a Christmas market in Binghamton's, and this thing is huge. So it's at Marshall Hall in Binghamton's in Kitchener. If you're from around the area, you'll know where that is, and that's what I'll be doing. So other than that, I've been slowly working away at When Legends Rise, and I will be doing a live read this Thursday, unless something unforeseen pops up. So you can catch me on Facebook on my author page doing my live edits around 7 o'clock on Thursday evening.
Nice.
How about you, Dave?
Well, for me, as I mentioned last week, I had a bit of a bad week last week and didn't get really very much done. But I'm glad to say that this week I'm back in the swing of things, and I've already added over 2,000 words to Hyperion Jones Book 2. As Richard mentioned, I was down with Richard and his good wife Caroline at the weekend, and I was very, very pleased to be able to pick up this, which I can barely lift. It's here.
That's a monster.
I recognize that book.
Yeah, I can't remember the author's name, but Ricardo somebody or other.
I'm going to claim it if nobody else does. I wrote it.
There you go. I mean, look at this. This is a doorstop. And I also was very pleased to pick up another very interesting book, which is from another Ontario author, which is a book of poetry by Alexandria Goodall. So looking forward to reading that very much.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book. Yeah, she's a local author down here in Southern Ontario.
That's great.
So, what about yourself, Christy?
I'm glad you're back on track, Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this week, episode 19 of Corrupted Magic went live. I also Corrupted Magic passed 200 likes on Kindle Vella, which is really, really cool.
Awesome.
Very exciting. Everything is a milestone. So episode 19 is up. It's called Outnumbered, and this is one where Knox and Dr. Blood, one of my favorite forgotten historical characters, have to face an enormous amount of magical gangsters called the Ruin Rats. So he needs to avoid using his magic because the Ruin Rats have corrupted magic, and corrupted magic draws from other people's magic. So we can't rely on magic this time. Should be interesting. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's very interesting.
Say no more.
Yeah. So that's this week's episode. And aside from that, I did finish writing a very grimoire Christmas, which I'm super excited about. It's just a totally separate Christmas short story with the grimoire characters. And I've been trying to write like a Victorian Christmas short story for I think it's like 2 or 3 years, and it has never worked out. Not with characters I already had, and not with new characters. It just never. I just had nothing to write. I don't know. It just wouldn't come out. And then with these characters, it was just easy. It just came, so easily. So I will be putting that up. That this year, that's going to be a Patreon exclusive. It's only $1 to join. So if you want to read that and everything else with Corrupted Magic and Grimoire Society of Dark Acts, you can join there. It's patreon.com/ChristyStratus. Otherwise, it'll be published next year for everyone else. Cool. More towards December. So it'll be like a year from now. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. I'm really happy with the progress I've made. So with that being said, let's head into our guest tonight, who is Rachel Lulich. And she is a sci-fi author. Last week we had a sci-fi author. This week we have a sci-fi author. It's a very exciting time for us.
Lovely.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you, Rachel.
Well, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Oh, absolutely. We're glad to have you.
Hi, Rachel.
So, yeah, start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your books, and then we'll get into a deep dive into you.
Oh boy.
Very intimidating.
Deep dives. So I write science fiction primarily. I have a trilogy out. It's near future realistic sci-fi, and that's what I have been primarily focusing on for the last few years. The third book actually comes out in just a few weeks, so very exciting. But I live in Indiana, but I'm originally from the West Coast. But I have lived all over, and I've traveled all over, and I love adventure basically. So I write adventure stories primarily, and that's where that comes from. I think I just really enjoy people going out and having adventures and having to overcome unexpected situations. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm also a military veteran, and the characters in my book are all in the Air Force. So eventually the Space Force. So that's also part of where I get my inspiration from for that.
That's really cool. Near future, you got the thumbs up from Dave.
Awesome.
He does that kind of writing as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah, there's not very much near future sci-fi out there, but it's fun.
Yeah. So, Rachel, on your website, you mentioned that you were a cryptologic linguist.
Yes.
Which sounds incredible. So, could you maybe tell us a little bit about that and how your experience in the Air Force actually has kind of influenced your writing?
Yeah, for sure. So I was in the Air Force for 6 years, and I was an Arabic linguist. So basically that means I learned Arabic, and I learned it in the Air Force. I had 18 months to become proficient, so that was a challenge. And so my Air Force career started with basic training and then language school for a very long time. And then I went to cryptology school, which sounds a little bit more dramatic than it is. It's basically just getting accustomed to the types of things you might be working with in the language. And then went on to my duty station, which was in Georgia, of all places, where I proceeded to work as an Arabic linguist, supporting the U-2 aircraft and just listening to stuff in Arabic. And then after a while of doing that, after about a year of doing that, following about 2.5 years of training, it's a very long training pipeline. I then deployed to Afghanistan for half a year. And then when I came back, I went into the what's called Standardization and Evaluation Office, which basically is the office that oversees all the operations for the job that I had been doing before I went to Afghanistan. So evaluating people, making sure they're doing their jobs correctly and proficiently, and making sure that everything's being done according to the law and according to policies and that sort of thing. So that's basically the summary of my Air Force career. I was enlisted, but I worked with, when I was in the Stanival office, I worked with a couple of officers pretty regularly. So my characters are in these particular books are officers because those are the people who go into space. So I drew on my experience of working with officers. What are they like, and what's the military system like? I actually got to draw on my experience in Afghanistan as well because I was in an aircrew position there and learned how to talk on the radio for that. And there's, of course, a lot of radio communications in space travel. So I was able to draw on that for the sort of style of communications. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
That's amazing. And before we go any farther, we keep doing this every time. We've been trying to do these giveaways recently, and we always forget about them. So you were saying you want to do a giveaway today, and so tell us a little bit about the giveaway.
Yes, I want to give away my entire trilogy, the entire sci-fi trilogy, which is called Fractured Galaxy Trilogy, in ebook form to somebody who asks a great question.
Awesome.
This evening. Yeah. And the third book doesn't come out until December 16th, but I can send on the first two right away, and then the third book when it's ready.
That's great. So you're building up to this launch. Do you do big book launches? Do you just do a soft book launch? And why don't you tell us a little bit about it's book 3 in the Fractured Galaxy series?
Yeah, I don't do a huge launch. I always have a launch party at my local independent bookstore, and we have cake. I do a reading, and then yeah, you gotta have cake. I do a reading, and then some Q&A basically with whoever's there. It's really fun. I did that for my previous book as well, the second book in the series. So about the series, the first book is called Random Walk, which is a math science term. The second book is called The Ethics of Hope. And then the third book is called Standard Candles, which is an astronomy term. And basically, it's a continuing story of these 3 Air Force astronauts who are on a mission to Mars, but end up getting a little bit sidetracked when their experimental engine malfunctions and sends them elsewhere. And unfortunately, they do not have the technology that they need to control a return to Earth, or even really to talk to ground control anymore. So it's quite a challenge for them trying to figure out how to survive in space. And then, of course, the folks back home are just trying to figure out what the heck happened and how do we help them. So book 3 is the culmination of that story. It's the part of the story that is the race against the clock, because they've been out in space for a while and they've managed to survive this long, but now they have to survive long enough to try to get home if they can. And the folks back home have to sort of battle the prevailing winds that want to sort of move on and count them as lost because they've been gone for so long. So that's what book 3 is dealing with.
That's great. And will that be your last one? Is it this trilogy or?
Yes, this is a trilogy, so that'll be the last one for this particular story. I do toy with the idea of writing more books in this story world, but it would be a different story, perhaps a little farther in the future. The next set of the next generation of spaceflight or something like that. I haven't decided yet, but for now, yes, this is the conclusion of this particular story and the trilogy.
Yeah. Do you take any inspiration from particular? Whenever I think of anything near future space or actually just space, I'm always thinking about Star Trek myself because I'm a huge fan. High five, David. So sorry, Richard, but anyway, huge high five, Star Trek fan. And so I just wondered, if you take any inspiration, or if you even need any inspiration from those types of places, since you actually would know so much about this kind of stuff and the military and things like that.
Yeah, I definitely did a ton of research to try to make it as grounded in reality as possible. But I do take inspiration from other creative works. So I am a huge Stargate fan, Stargate SG-1 in particular. So I think there's definitely some inspiration drawn there just because I love the show so much and have watched it so many times. And then also movies like Apollo 13 were an influence, especially in certain aspects of these books, like the the opening launch sequence, for example, some of the way that ground control works, which I also researched in addition to the movie, obviously, and found transcripts of the actual communications from that mission and that sort of thing. But even the movie and the way that it tells its story was a bit of an inspiration as well. So that kind of thing, I would say.
So you said that you're a big Stargate fan, Rachel, and then you were in the Air Force. Now, come on, that's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it?
It's
so when you look at things like Stargate, for instance, with your experience, I mean, do you find like the depictions of the military kind of like head shaking, or do you find them fairly good? I mean, what's your response to it?
Yeah. So Stargate actually does a decent job. I mean, it's dealing with very unrealistic scenarios, obviously, but some things that I appreciate about how Stargate depicted the military was the professionalism and dedication to the mission. They had a great leader in General George Hammond, depicted really, really well, I thought. But they also show sort of the other side, because there's all types in the military, right? So they also have the occasional cad or poor leader as well. And I appreciate that also, because, it is, you do get all types. My experience in the military, thankfully, was super positive. So I mostly identify with those positive portrayals that Stargate focused on. They do things right, like, little things like saluting, the way they wear their uniforms for the most part, stuff like that. There's every once in a while you see a show where, people are just discussing classified information in a random cafe and you're like, oh my goodness, no. Yeah. Or there's supposed to be a military character who's enlisted and they have a horrendous salute. And it's like, if they were an officer, I would let it go, because I've seen some interesting salutes from officers. But nobody who's enlisted does anything other than this, like, it's just the way it is. So sometimes shows or films will have things like that completely take me out of it, at least for a moment. But Stargate SG-1 in particular never really violated that. When I first saw it before I was in the military, and I've seen a bunch of it since getting out of the military. And yeah, they take liberties. There's stuff that's, not the way it's done. Of course, it's fiction. It's a TV show. But I think the general tone of their depiction and a lot of those little details was actually quite good.
That's really cool. Great to know, because I like that show as well.
I have a question from Hillary here. So what advice would you have for readers who are new to the sci-fi genre? Any recommendations for good starting points?
That's a really good question. I was once a new to the sci-fi genre reader. It's funny, I grew up watching Star Trek with my brothers, and Battlestar Galactica runs the original show, Star Wars, all of that. Mm-hmm. But I got it in my head for some reason, I think around middle school, that I didn't like science fiction, and that sort of those things were exceptions. And so I didn't watch it very much for a while. And then I discovered Stargate and found out how wrong I was, and a whole bunch of other, shows and films. And I started reading a lot more sci-fi than I ever had. I would say I personally like to try shorter things or things that sound similar to stuff I already know I like. So for example, if you like Stargate, or if you like The Martian, or if you enjoy Apollo 13, Hidden Figures, that kind of thing, you'll probably like my books. But if you're more of a Star Wars fan, you might not like my books as much. They're not, that sort of space opera, type of style, space fantasy. So think about what you do know of sci-fi and try to find stuff in that vein is what I would suggest. But also branch out. I love H.G. Wells and things like that. And I don't write anything like him, but I love reading his books. Jules Verne is great. I've read some short stories recently by an author whose name is escaping me that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to look for more stuff by them. So short stories are also a good way to check things out. But it's really convenient too now with being able to look inside the book when you're looking at it online and check out that first chapter. Or if you're in a bookstore, you can always read that first chapter. If you can, always read the first chapter. If you like the first chapter, you'll probably like the book. So that's another thing I would suggest.
Yeah, good advice.
That is great advice. I always tell people when I'm trying to sell my books, they ask me what it's about and what it's like, and I always tell them it's more like Lord of the Rings as opposed to Game of Thrones. But I always tell them, I love them both. I love George R. R. Martin, even though I'm not happy with him for not finishing a series. But
Nobody
I love his writing style. I think he writes great stories, but I don't write anywhere like him. So if you're looking for something like Game of Thrones, then my fantasy is not for you. So exactly the same with science fiction. I don't write science fiction, but just with what you said, there's so many different variations of science fiction. Like there's Jules Verne type, there's like The Martian or the Star Wars, which is kind of science fantasy, but still it's science fiction for sure, and it's just a different type for sure. So we were discussing before we went online, and I'm going to steal this question from Christy because I keep seeing it on my screen, and I'm going to ask anyway. And I think it's just the name that really makes me want to say it, because what is Indiegogo?
Yeah, so Indiegogo is an online crowdfunding platform. It's very much like Kickstarter, if you're familiar with that. You're welcome, Hillary. I would say the main difference between Indiegogo and Kickstarter is that on Kickstarter, if you don't raise 100% of your goal funding, you don't get any of it. It reverts back to the people who pledged the donation. They don't get charged. But on Indiegogo, you can select the option to do it that way, or you can select the option to do flexible funding, where whatever people contribute, even if it doesn't reach your goal, you still get those funds. And so, maybe you can go forward with the project with a slightly lower budget or something like that, which is what happened with me with my first book. I did all 3 of these sci-fi novels with Indiegogo, and the first one didn't fully fund. It was close, but not quite there. The second 2 did fully fund. They exceeded the funding goal. So that was great. But because I did flexible funding on Indiegogo, I'm looking at the books. That's what I'm looking at. Sorry. I was able to move forward with the first novel anyway, even though I didn't get quite my full funding goal, and I was able to get that out and then move forward with the next 2.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I've never done a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, but there's thresholds that people have to meet, or the author has to meet, to selling their books, or at least the pre-sale of it. And when you hit these thresholds, then you offer the reader some kind of reward. So,
yeah, sort of.
So if you don't meet your funding goal, do you still offer those rewards, or how does that work? Do they let you off that? Or?
Yeah, so there's 2 different reward systems in these crowdfunding platforms. There's the reward tiers, which are basically, let's say you're doing a crowdfunding campaign for your next book, and you say, if you donate $5, you get the ebook for free. If you donate $20, you get the ebook and the paperback, etc. People who donate to those goals, even if you don't reach your total amount that you wanted, will still get those rewards. And then if you exceed the fundraising goal that you had, you can offer additional rewards for either certain levels of donation or for everybody who donated. So for example, on my 3rd book, those are called stretch goals. I had as a stretch goal an ebook, The Art of Space, a behind-the-scenes ebook on the artwork behind my trilogy. And we reached the level of funding to unlock that stretch goal. It's sort of an extra thing that you can offer people. So that type of thing, people aren't going to get unless you reach or exceed the amount that you've set for that. But for your baseline fundraising goal, they will receive whatever rewards are associated with the amount that they donate.
Very interesting.
How do you go about drawing people to that? I know, like you were saying, your first one didn't fully fund, and then the next one, and I assume the one after that probably exceeded funding. And of course, if you have a reader base, that helps. But still, how do you draw people over there? There are so many people looking for funding with that.
Yeah, it's very true. Basically, the same way you draw, similar to how you draw readers, you just try to get the word out. But it's a little bit different in that you're more marketing to your family and friend circle first, and then you kind of expand from there. Whereas with book marketing, you're expanding from the beginning outside of that inner circle. So it is a little bit different. You first reach out to the people you know, and like everybody you know, and I think if you have good rewards, that's a huge help. So I had book rewards like the ebook, the paperbacks. I've got signed paperbacks. I've got limited edition numbered signed hardbacks. I made some cool merch for my books. I've got these unit patches for the made up units in the stories.
Oh, those are cute.
And I've got the associated challenge coins, which if you're a military person, you know exactly what that is. And those are all really cool perks and things like that. So if you have good rewards, I think you'll be more successful in drawing people, or if you have a really good network. I sort of leaned more on rewards than network, which is probably why the first one didn't quite fully fund. But I think if you communicate well what you're using the money for also and why it's important, that's a big plus as well, to help people understand what it is you're doing and why they should participate.
So that brings up an interesting question. Then what do you use the money for?
Yeah. So one of the things I use the money for is cover design. We talked about this before going live. I have a professional cover designer do my books. His name is Christopher Dahl. He's a space artist out of Washington State. He's fantastic. And he's done the covers to all three of my books, the base art of the cover is actual paintings. And then he adds like the text and stuff in Photoshop afterwards. And they're just amazing looking. So they look like, published by a big publishing house books, which I love, and which I knew would happen because he had done a series previous to mine, which had been indie published just like mine, and then had been picked up by a larger press, which kept his covers. So I knew that they were good quality stuff. So those are the covers there, stabilized. Yeah. So some of the money goes to that. Some of the money goes to editing. You shouldn't just edit your own work. You should especially, I'm an editor myself. I'm a developmental editor, freelance. But copy editing, I'm horrible at. So I made sure to hire copy editors, for example. And then also interior design of the book so that the page layout looks right and all of that. Those are the types of things that I spent my money on. Basically, the things that make it a professional product.
You mentioned like the colors and covers and working with Chris Dahl, which is actually how we originally kind of got talking, which was kind of cool. But so what was the process like working with Chris, who's kind of, he's a professional artist. So I mean, it's like, what was that process like? I mean, I've never done that because I do my own cover art. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, once I've written the book or written enough of it to know in pretty good detail what's actually going to happen within that book, I communicate with him about sort of the basic plot, what's going on, what the main visual elements of the book are. So for example, the spacecraft. It's a very realistic NASA style spacecraft, modular. It's got those different components to it. It doesn't look, it's launched, the different components are launched on the top of a rocket, right? So it's got to look kind of like, I took my inspiration from the design for the spacecraft that NASA's designing for their missions to the moon and Mars, this sort of modular aspect. So I communicated that with him, and then I've got a totally invented component, which is their experimental engine, and I just told him what it is and what it does, and he just made up that visual and said, "How's this?" And I said, "That looks fantastic." And that's the ring component, where you've got that sort of module with a ring around it. That's that component that he designed. But wanting the service module at the back with the solar panels and the communications array on it, and then you have these other modules. I sent him a little sketch of it, horrible little sketch because I'm not an artist, and he turned it into something really beautiful with light from the stars shining off of it and everything. It's great. So those main visual components for the first book, we knew we wanted to focus on the spacecraft. And I knew that they were going to be in a dark nebula, which has that red color to it. So he designed the first cover based on that. And I also knew there would be a planet. So the back of the book actually has a planet on it because it's a continuous wraparound painting.
Oh, yeah.
And then for the second book, similarly, I knew I was going to have them near something akin to the Ring Nebula. So we've got that on the back and the spacecraft once again featured. But there was more discussion on whether we wanted to feature the spacecraft or feature ground control or something like that on the second book. We ended up deciding to go with the spaceship for continuity. And I'm really glad we did, because then the third book, we've got a close-up of the spaceship, because there's we wanted to feature the astronauts doing a spacewalk. So that's what we've got there. And I know for the third book also, in terms of the star design, I know Chris was inspired by the James Webb Telescope photos that had come out around the time we were discussing the cover art, which was really cool. And so he's got those really neat star images with the light spikes coming out of them. So
that is really nice.
Yeah,
so that's what the basic process was. He sends me sketches, and I basically say which ones I like best, and then he does sort of rough painting, and then finishes it up, sends it for final approval. It's always fabulous, so I say yes, looks good, and then the discussion over like the font for the title and all of that happens after the artwork is complete.
Now he does his own show on Twitch TV, and
Yes, he does.
So did he actually do your spaceships while he was doing that, or did he do them off to the side?
So he did them off to the side. My first two books, I think, at least the first book, maybe the first two, predate his Twitch activities.
Okay.
But I'm if he painted my spaceship in Twitch, I'm not aware of it. I
That'd
don't
be really
think he
neat to
did.
watch him do it. Yeah.
It would be really cool. Yeah.
Watch him create your own cover. That'd be really cool.
That would be neat. Yeah.
And you can start chiming in. No, I don't like that.
Why'd you put that color on?
That's it. We're through.
Yeah.
So that would be really cool to see your cover getting created.
Yeah.
It would be. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. But you kind of get to see it in, stop motion, as it were, with the sketches and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
That is really cool, since it's being made essentially from scratch.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention, before anything else, I just want to mention the giveaway again. So Rachel's asking if any great questions. She is going to reward her trilogy, and book 3 will be out on December 16th. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I imagine we'll award that after December 16th, but we'll get the information to Rachel, and she will award you with the whole trilogy in ebook form. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask Rachel, please do so now before we sign off.
Absolutely. Can be about her writing, can be about anything, really anything having to do with our guest today. So I did see, Rachel, that you have a middle grade sci-fi, right, coming out in 2020. Yes, I think it's 2023 with a publisher. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. So I've written a book called The Red Door, and that is coming out in 2023 with Bandersnatch Books, which is a great publishing company name. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I love middle grade fiction, which is books for young readers, roughly ages 8 to 12. I have loved those books always. I actually really got into them in high school and have never looked back. I think they're fantastic. And so I've always wanted to write middle grade as well. So this is a science fiction novel. It's a little bit different. It's not a realistic near future. It's more akin in terms of tone and even style a little bit. It's more akin to like The Giver, those books. But I'm very excited about it. It took me forever to write. I first came up with the idea actually for the title, which usually I come up with the story idea first. Which is probably why it took me so long to write this one. But I came up with the title when I was deployed in Afghanistan. There was this red door kind of in the middle of just a chain link fence, and it was always locked, and we couldn't go through it, and there was no access to us to the whatever courtyard or compound or whatever was behind it. And so I was wondering what's on the other side of that door.
That was presumably.
Presumably, yeah. Although the chain link fence wasn't high enough to conceal a Stargate. It must have been a little one, like the one Orlin made.
Like an Alice in Wonderland Stargate.
Yeah, exactly. Just a little shrunken down. That's all good. So I came up with the title, and then a few years later, when I got out of the Air Force to pursue writing, tried to write it as a NaNoWriMo novel, and discovered that I cannot write NaNoWriMo style. It does not work for me. And then tried it again, came up with a really good start, got some good feedback from an agent, and just struggled to figure out how to write the darn thing for a few years. And then in 2020, actually in the fall, I finally I spent the summer just thinking about it here and there and figured out what it was actually about, like what the themes were and all of that sort of thing, what I wanted the character arc to be for a main character, how I wanted to write it, and then I wrote it in 6 weeks. So it was a long time coming, and then it was just boom all at once. And then of course I had some beta readers looked at it, did some editing on it, etc., before sending it out. But it's been a long time coming, and I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. So I'm very excited for that. I can't believe I have to wait a whole year.
Yeah. Did you have any kind of like struggle? I know that you already like middle grade sci-fi anyway, but did you have any struggle sort of taking, your writing from adult down to, not down to, but into a different style to make middle grade work, whereas like you have experience in the military, all this great science stuff, and then you have to make it understandable to a totally different level of reader. Was that like difficult at all?
Short answer, no. I think I read so much middle grade that it's sort of in my blood. It's in my brain. The sci-fi novels were much more difficult to write in terms of the actually doing the drafting, because of how close I kept it to realistic near future science and technology and characters. I had to do so much research and then figuring out how to incorporate that research into the story and where to sort of let something be a little fictionalized and that sort of thing. It was actually much more difficult for me to write those than it was for me to write The Red Door, despite the duration. Once I knew what I was doing for the story, much easier to write in that style for young readers. For me, I think, and I don't think, I'm not saying that it's easier to write middle grade fiction than fiction for adults. I don't think that's true across the board. But for me, it came a little bit more naturally.
You've also written a stage play set in 1930s Germany.
They've done their homework.
We try. Which obviously is very different from sci-fi. So could you tell us a little bit about how that came about and the difference between writing a novel, for example, and writing for the theatre?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love history, and the stage play is historical fiction. It takes place in 1930s Germany. And I love Germany and German as well. That's so the topic appealed. And I have always loved sort of theater and television and film. I actually did a year of film school back in the day. I really, really love that vein of storytelling, that audiovisual, the whole thing, everything about it. And dialogue is my best skill as a writer, even at writing novels. It's the easiest thing for me is writing character dialogue. And so when I got out of the Air Force, I went back to school. I already had a BA before I went in. I went and got another BA and then a master's degree in book publishing. And when I was doing my BA and master's studies, I took an elective course called Dramatic Writing. And it was a 3-term course. And dramatic writing doesn't mean writing dramas per se. It just means like writing for performance, writing for stage or film, television, podcast, radio, any of that. And so I got to sort of brush off my screenwriting skills from those classes I had taken years earlier and add to them with some knowledge about how theater works. And I did this 3-class sequence. The first semester, I was just, doing it as a normal class. And then the second and third semesters, I did independent study. And basically, I spent the first semester figuring out or reading a ton of plays and discussing them with the professor and Karen Magaldi, she's wonderful, and figuring out what I wanted to write about and how I wanted to go about it. And then, and definitely inspired by Bertolt Brecht's plays from that era. He wrote a series, several short plays set in that time and place, which were phenomenal. And And then the third semester was, and so the second semester was reading, figuring out what I wanted to do, starting the research. The third semester was finishing the research and writing the play, which then got workshopped by acting students taking the core class. And then later, I had it workshopped by a community theater group, and then my church actually put it on as a community theater show for a weekend, two performance limited run. It was really cool. Then I finally sent it off to publishers, and Wordcraft's Theatrical picked it up and published it in January 2021. So a very different process in terms of it's almost all dialogue. There's very little description in theatrical writing, just enough so actors know where they need to be on stage, basically, or if you have any specific stylistic things that you want in terms of like lighting or sets or anything. And then the rest is dialogue, and it's very much about writing between the lines. So that characters aren't just saying outright always what they're thinking, etc. Because generally speaking, we don't. And I think that also plays into dialogue writing for novels. If you struggle to write dialogue, if you're a writer and you struggle to write dialogue, take screenwriting or playwriting, and you'll improve so much. You know, if you struggle with word choice, take a class on writing poetry. You know, things like that. I'm a very big believer in cross study of different writing disciplines. I think they all feed into each other and are very helpful. And then there's the sort of collaborative component of playwriting, which you really don't have when you're writing a novel by yourself. Each week I would take scenes in, and these acting students would read them, performing them as readers. And you really get a feel for how it's actually coming across when you do that, and how it's coming across visually a little bit, but particularly, you know, in terms of just speech, what lines are difficult for people to say. I had an actor reading a short monologue that a character has, and I realized that I needed to rearrange the order of the paragraphs in the monologue. You know, things like that you sort of get from hearing it read and performed by actors that you don't otherwise have. And then I'd go home, do rewrites, write additional scenes, come back the next week, do it again. So it's a very different process. I was making changes. I even made a couple of changes after it was performed those 2 times. I made 2 changes after that, relatively small changes at that point. But after each workshop, I made quite a few revisions, and then in getting it into its final solid form. So it is an extremely different process. Yeah, definitely. The beginning process, I would say, is the same, where you're just trying to decide what to write and how you want to approach it. But the drafting process, the drafting process can be the same. I happen to have it workshopped as I was drafting. A lot of playwrights wait until they've got the draft finished, and then it gets workshopped. But once you're at the workshop stage, it's totally different process and very, very fun.
Would you write another play?
I certainly would. I just have to figure out what to write about. But I loved it. Yeah. I loved playwriting. I love screenwriting. I want to get into television writing, actually. So that's definitely something I would do more of. Yeah. Maybe now that I'm finished with the trilogy, I'll have time to pursue some of that.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Rachel. So I'm going to have to cut in here. I see we're at the end of our show. Thank you again for coming on. And it looks like we just had the one question in here. So,
lucky Hillary.
Yes. So I think that's totally up to you. It's your call, but I would imagine that's who will reward the prize to.
Oh,
yeah. All right. So before we go, obviously your website's going on there. What's next for you? You say you have a release, The Red Door is coming out, but I imagine if that's the case, that's already written. So what's next for Rachel?
Well, what I want to write next?
Sure. What are you doing next?
So I volunteer with Civil Air Patrol, and which is the volunteer auxiliary to the Air Force. You don't have to have been in the military to serve in Civil Air Patrol. I volunteer with the cadets who are aged 12 through 21, and I really want to write a series of historical fiction novels for young readers about things that cadets have done through history. So like, for example, in the 50s in Hawaii, cadets warned locals one time of an incoming tsunami. And as a result, everybody made it to safety and there were no casualties. Things like that. I want to tell those stories. I also have a science fiction series that I want to write for young readers, which is not quite as well developed as an idea. So I won't tell you guys about it now, but it takes place a little farther in the future. And it's a little bit more of an adventure mystery story. And then, of course, as I said, I've written a TV pilot. I'd like to get into that as well. So now that I've finished 2 projects, my brain is kind of going in all directions. But those are the next projects I want to undertake.
Nice.
That's awesome. So where can we find your books?
You can find them online anywhere you buy books. If you live in Indiana, you might be able to find them at a local bookstore. If you live in the Bloomington area, I've got some author events coming up, and you can find those by signing up for my newsletter on my website. I also have an online store at my website where you can get the books from as well. But yeah, Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, all of those will have them also.
Yeah, and just worth noting, I think this is the last day of your Cyber Monday sale, but just to mention, if there's anybody who happens to be watching at this very moment or until maybe midnight, there is a cyber sale going on Rachel's site. So.
Oh, cool. That quick question, NaNoWriMo, yay or nay? Oh, sorry.
He was not here earlier, Rachel. So
for me, nay. I think NaNoWriMo is awesome, but it does not work for me. I'm not a pantser. I'm a plotter, and I don't do well writing by word counts. I do well writing by scenes and story chunks, not word counts. Sure. And so NaNoWriMo doesn't work for me. It works for a lot of other people, though. Oh, we've got new questions coming in. Any quirky writing tip unique to you? Ooh, that's a good question. Quirky writing tip. I'm feeling the time pressure.
Don't worry.
I don't know if I do anything particularly quirky. Oh no, I do. Oh, here's something that I don't know if it's quirky per se, but it's maybe a little bit unique. I like to do my note taking and my story sketching and character sketching in this wonderful thing. It's a notebook. It's called Reconnect, I think, and basically it's a magnetic notebook. The interior has that magnetic cord going all the way through it, and then the pages have magnet strips, so you can remove a page, you can flip to another section, you can put the page where it belongs with the notes for that other project you're working on. I love this thing. It's fantastic. So cool. It's not cheap, but it's amazing, and you can buy additional page packs if you run out, and you don't have to buy a new book. It's really great.
That sounds like
I so want that. That's amazing. That's one of my problems. Like when I do write on paper, which I love writing in notebooks and stuff. That's one of my problems. I write out of order a lot. And so writing on paper is like both fun and makes me a little bit anxious.
You maybe should look into these notebooks.
I love that. Oh my God.
Yeah. Quick question about the giveaway before we go off air. We had more questions. So does Hillary have competition or is it already official?
I think you've already awarded Hillary.
Okay, great.
There, yeah.
That's what I thought as well, but I wanted to check.
I don't think she pull back on that. So anyway, JD, you're going to have to come in earlier next week and get your questions in sooner. But welcome to the show, JD. It's better late than never. But so next week is our monthly live read. Yay. Dave, Christy, and I look forward to these all the time. And we've invited Rachel to partake in one of our live reads sometime next year. And we'll get in touch. And they're a lot of fun. We kind of dress up as characters and do silly things. It's almost like a Carol Burnett show. So we always try to Dave. Well, actually, I think Dave always wins. He always makes the rest of us laugh. So
yeah,
nice. He's the Tim Conway of the group.
Some of the crazy costumes. So, but I look forward to next week, and I'm going to be something very wacky next week. So,
oh boy,
yeah. Hopefully, I don't break my computer while I'm doing it. So.
Oh my God.
My goodness.
So we will feature the works of Paula Harvey, David Payne, and one from my book, Into the Madness, which is book 3 of my very first trilogy. So it'll be a blast from the past. That's the trilogy that started my whole Soulforge universe, and I look forward to reading and listening to Dave and Christy and our guest authors read from my works as well. That's always so much fun.
We're in trouble when Richard's taken us into the madness.
Oh no, we're already there, buddy. We're already there. So thanks again, Rachel, for joining us. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Rachel.
Thank
I had a
you.
blast. You guys are great.
That's awesome. So for Rachel, Christy, Dave, and myself, we hope everyone has a great week. Until we meet again, take good care.
Good night.